Greetings, loved ones. I'm Gracie Murphy, president of HOC Justice Project, and we're based in Huntsville, but we're living and working in Honduras and throughout the world, digitally throughout the world. I'm also the author of Journey to Justice, Finding God and Destiny in the Darkness, which is a story about how this ministry began, the work that we do with victims of violence. It also has my testimony of having been a victim of violence. You can find Journey to Justice on Amazon.com. The last 16 years, we have been working in Honduras to rescue, care for, redeem, and empower justice for women and children who suffer violence. For more information on our ministry, you can check out our website, which is listed in the description. To help get these messages out, which are really important, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single one. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and please share these messages with others. You never know. Just by doing so, you could save a life. Today, we're going to talk about how violence against women and children affects everyone. Violence against women and children comes in different forms, and without help, they become lost in unhealthy cycles that affect everybody. All violence against women and children has a negative influence on their lives. Many become caught in a vicious cycle of continued abuse and shattered self-worth. And if help is not available to these women and children, the devastating effects of abuse continue and create an impact on society. There are many different forms of violence to be aware of. Three of the most common forms of violence against children are child sexual abuse, physical abuse, and murder, and being a witness to abuse taking place in the home. For example, the child's parents may have physically violent fights, and another type of abuse occurs when a child either is fleeing an abusive situation or is kicked out of a home. These children are considered throwaway children and often end up in the streets. When children have been victims of violence, the cycle begins, and frequently their lives take a different path than the one that existed before the violence. Child abuse can produce dire consequences during the victim's childhood and their adulthood. Time alone does not heal the wounds of abuse, and this is why intervention is critical. Often, women who are victims of violence were also victims in childhood. Violence against women is similar to violence against children. The three main forms of violence against women are domestic violence and murder, rape and sexual assault, and prostitution, which includes pornography, strip clubs, and sex trafficking. Homicide is a frequent cause of death. Besides the danger, women who escape the abuse often need years of therapy to find a sense of normalcy in their lives. This holds true with all violence towards women and children. Studies suggest that persons who were victims of child abuse as a youth are likely to be victims of physical abuse as an adult. And when victims do not reach out for assistance, they can fall prey to the cycle of continued abuse, such as re-victimization, including rape, domestic abuse, pornography, sex trafficking, and prostitution. This occurs when a victim is looking for a place of acceptance and belonging. The sex industry preys on girls and young women who are easy targets due to their low self-esteem. The cycle also becomes evident when victims of violence reach out in search of other negative behaviors in hopes of numbing the pain. Some examples are drug and alcohol addictions, eating disorders, increased sexual behavior, and suicide. It has been well documented that victims of abuse often gravitate toward other abusers or become abusers themselves. Nevertheless, one of the main problems associated with victims of violence is the destruction of self-worth, depression, and oftentimes post-traumatic stress disorder. All forms of violence against women and children have devastating effects on their self-esteem, which creates more problems to overcome, creating a necessity for these women and children to receive help. The psychological impact of violence is only part of the problem. Violence against women and children creates problems and chaos for everyone in the community. From the onset of violence in a neighborhood to routine police visits and emergency trips to the hospital, violence is clearly a problem that most want to ignore or simply hope it goes away on its own. However, the unseen problems that cannot be ignored or wished away become apparent in the future of the children involved. Without intervention, children exposed to violence may suffer long-term repercussions of their exposure, including diminished health and well-being. Children who experience violence either as victims or as witnesses are also at increased risk of becoming violent themselves. Another behind-the-scenes reminder is that while women are trying to escape violent situations, they are often unable to pay their medical bills and must rely on victim services and other government funding for help. In Honduras, there is little or no help for a victim of violence, which is why God has called all of us to be part of the solution. This is where God's people, the church, everyone needs to step in and do the work. Another factor is that because violence can create low self-worth for victims, it is not uncommon for these women and children to end up less educated and earning a lower income, which may later create the need for further aid. Overcoming the destructive cycle can take years of therapy and assistance, and without help, the wave of violence starts all over again and leaves devastation in its wake. Everyone has a role in breaking the momentum of violence. One way to stop the violence from growing stronger in society is to stop generalizing and accepting stereotypes. The way society responds to its victims can be a determining factor in stopping violence. It is important to listen to family, friends, and the media, dissecting the words being used against a victim. By examining one's thoughts and comments, preconceived notions will change. In Honduras, machismo is a huge mechanism that traps women in violence, and stereotypes within their communities and their churches become chains that keep them in bondage of suffering instead of rescuing them out of oppression. One common question that demeans the victim is, if she was afraid, why didn't she just leave? An important fact to remember is that most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is the time when she has had enough and she wants to leave. Also, their abusers have programmed their minds to believe that no one will help them, no one cares about them, and without him, they cannot survive. Another familiar comment might be, why was she out alone? These types of statements blame the victim. Blame must go where it belongs, on the abuser, to stop the cycle of violence in which women and children are trapped. Besides the stereotypes and generalizations about women and children, everyday society is bombarded with images of sex and violence. The subtlety of how flooded society has become seems to be unnoticed and acceptable. So much so that many have become numb to the messages. Violence and sexual content has seeped into children's clothes, video games, and dolls. Images of sex and violence can blur the lines between right and wrong, creating more ability for more violence in society. In turn, this creates more victims and more victimizers, which keeps the cycle going strong and keeps women and children weak. Finding solutions can be difficult because each type of violence is different. The most important part of creating change in society is empowering women and children. Through education and teaching victims to come forward, the importance of telling somebody and speaking out is so important to finding the solutions to ending violence against women and children. Education is also needed to teach society that violence against women is wrong. There is not enough help and funding to support the needs of these victims. Support and education are critical in creating a safer environment for everybody. As I said in our previous episode, the question is not if you will encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? This series is dedicated in honor of Gabby Pettito, a bright young woman whom the world has lost because of gender violence. You could be the person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions for justice. Those who suffer violence need those who love them, and those who don't even know them to step out and reach out to them, to give them the courage and the help to leave before it is too late. If you are a victim of violence, know this. God does not want you to suffer violence. He wants you to live free from violence in peace and tranquility. If you are a victim of violence and or find yourself in a dangerous situation, call 911 for help or reach out to somebody. Please reach out to somebody. To help get these messages out, please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, hit the like button, and please share these messages with others because you never know, just by doing so, you could save a life. If your organization, church, ministry, school, or business would like for us to provide training to your people, we can arrange it. Just email me at my address in the description. Tomorrow, we will talk about our responsibility in response to violence against women and children. Until then, God bless you.